May 12, 1948, just outside Chillicothe, Ohio, a monstrous roar shattered the quiet. A freight locomotive sat torn open, steel tubes jutting forward like spears. Officially, it was a tragic boiler explosion. But how did a straightforward engine turn into a deadly pressure bomb, claiming the lives of all 3 men in the cab, while the train itself barely moved? To uncover what really happened inside that locomotive, we need to understand how steam power turns deadly in a split second. At the heart of every steam locomotive sits a steel vessel built to contain enormous energy. The process begins in the firebox, a chamber lined with thick metal sheets. Here, coal burns fiercely and releases heat that transfers through the firebox walls into a surrounding bath of water. The water, held under pressure, absorbs this heat and begins to turn into steam. Above the firebox, the crown sheet forms the upper boundary and is supported by rows of stay bolts that hold it in place against the pressure from within. From the firebox, hot gases travel forward through a series of tubes that run the length of the boiler. These tubes are surrounded by water, and as the gases pass through, they give up more heat. The result is a rolling boil, with steam building above the waterline. At the top of the boiler, the steam dome collects the driest, hottest steam, ready to be harnessed for power. The journey continues as the steam is directed through pipes toward the cylinders. There, it pushes pistons back and forth and drives the main rods that turn the locomotive's massive driving wheels. Every part of this system, from the firebox to the dome, from the tubes to the cylinders, relies on careful balance. The boiler must contain pressures often exceeding 200 pounds per square inch, with every joint and seam holding back the force of a contained storm. When the system works, it delivers power and motion. But if that balance is lost, the stored energy can be released in an instant, with consequences that are anything but routine. A boiler failure is not a slow leak. It is a rapid loss of containment that turns the boiler itself into a blast source, releasing scalding steam and flying metal with devastating force. Inside the boiler, another layer of engineering comes into play. Beyond simply boiling water, the locomotive relies on a device called the superheater. After steam rises from the boiling water, it travels through a series of pipes, superheater elements, tucked inside larger boiler flues. There, the steam is exposed to even more heat from the hot gases rushing through the tubes. This process raises the steam's temperature well above the boiling point, sometimes reaching 600 degrees Fahrenheit or more. The result is what engineers call dry steam. Unlike the cloud of wet vapor that escapes a kettle, dry steam is invisible, hotter, and carries far more energy. It is what gives a heavy freight locomotive like the T1 its muscle, driving pistons with greater force and improved efficiency. But this power comes at a cost. Superheated steam is both a tool and a threat. If it escapes its steel prison, it does not just scald, it can strip flesh and blind in an instant. The energy stored inside a pressurized boiler filled with superheated steam is immense, even when the train is barely moving. The superheater tubes, running the length of the boiler, become channels for this invisible force. When a boiler's pressure boundary fails, the dry steam inside is released with explosive violence. The elements seen protruding from a wrecked locomotive are not just debris, they are the very conduits that once held back a storm. In a split second, what was meant to drive the train forward becomes the source of destruction, and the line between controlled power and catastrophe vanishes. A sudden, monstrous roar shattered the quiet hills south of Chillicothe on the morning of May 12, 1948. Windows rattled, doors shook, and startled residents rushed outside, searching for the source of the blast. The sound carried for miles, echoing across farmland and small towns, leaving people frozen in their tracks. On Charleston Pike, the source became clear. A freight train sat motionless on the rails, its locomotive twisted and torn open at the front. Metal debris littered the ballast and embankments, with lengths of tubing and steel scattered in every direction. The engine itself looked impossibly deformed, as if some invisible force had speared its insides forward through the smokebox. Local railroad workers and section hands arrived within minutes, drawn by the shockwave and the rising column of steam. They found the train upright, but the cab was filled with scalding vapor, and the air reeked of hot metal and coal smoke. The locomotive's number, 3020, was barely visible beneath the grime and twisted iron. Witnesses would later tell the local paper that they had never heard anything so violent, describing the explosion as a single consuming roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. Chesapeake and Ohio locomotive number 3020 stood at the center of the devastation, its number plate barely visible through layers of soot and twisted steel. This engine, a T1 Class 210-4 built for heavy freight, had been assigned to a routine run on Charleston Pike. Inside the cab that morning were 3 men: engineer W.R. Terry, fireman T.R. Lauter, and front brakeman W.C. Bush. All 3 would pay with their lives for what happened next. The explosion unleashed a flood of superheated steam and water into the cab, scalding the crew in seconds. Medical reports from the era describe injuries so severe that skin blistered and peeled away, and at least 1 crew member, Bush, was left blinded by the blast. Some accounts suggest he survived long enough to be treated by a doctor before dying at the hospital, but the outcome was the same for all. None of the head-end crew survived the day. The force of the blast left the locomotive upright on the rails, but the men inside had no chance against the energy released. Their names are recorded in the casualty lists that followed, a stark reminder that even the most powerful machines depend on the vigilance and fate of those who operate them. Low water. Inside a steam locomotive's boiler sets up a chain reaction that can turn routine operation into disaster. When the water level slips below the crown sheet, the flat metal plate forming the firebox roof, that sheet is left exposed to direct flame. Without the cooling effect of water, the crown sheet's temperature rises rapidly, sometimes glowing red-hot within minutes. The stay bolts, small steel rods anchoring the crown sheet to the outer shell, depend on that water to keep their strength. As the metal overheats, these bolts begin to lose their grip, softening and stretching under relentless pressure. One by one, they can start to fail, and with each failure, the sheet's ability to hold back the boiler's force weakens further. At this critical moment, even a small addition of water can have devastating consequences. The cold water hits the overheated crown sheet and flashes instantly to steam, creating a sudden spike in pressure. This surge seeks the weakest point. The crown sheet gives way, unleashing the boiler's full energy. Steam and water, now at hundreds of degrees, expand explosively, forcing their way forward. The front tube sheet, unable to contain the pressure, is punched out with the force of a battering ram, dragging superheater tubes and flues with it. The entire front of the locomotive is torn open, and the cab is instantly filled with lethal steam. Steam scalds are among the most devastating injuries a person can endure. When the boiler of number 3020 failed, the superheated steam, hotter than boiling water by hundreds of degrees, rushed into the cab, stripping away skin and blinding eyes in moments. Medical records from similar incidents describe a slow, agonizing progression. The outer layers of skin blister, then peel, while the body's own fluids are lost to the burns. Shock can set in quickly. Death is rarely instant. For engineer W.R. Terry, fireman T.R. Lauter, and brakeman W.C. Bush, the end was not as swift as the photograph might suggest. Some accounts say that Bush, the front brakeman, survived long enough to be treated by a doctor at the scene. His burns left him blind and barely conscious, but he reportedly spoke of the water level in his final hours. There is an unconfirmed story passed down in railroader circles that he begged for more water to be added, a detail that echoes the desperation caused by severe dehydration and shock. Whether or not this plea truly happened, the fact remains that all 3 men died from their injuries, not from the blast itself. Boiler explosions like this were rare, but when they did occur, the suffering could linger long after the noise had faded. Steam power vanished, but the risk never truly left. Today, every pressure vessel, whether in a hospital, factory, or train yard, demands vigilance. Safety depends on constant attention, not nostalgia. For every modern engineer, the lesson echoes. One overlooked gauge can still change everything. Share your thoughts below.